Hi everyone. Today's topic is going to be the history of a very specific municipality in Brazil's southeastern state of São Paulo. Many of you will probably find this episode to be fascinating. We'll be talking about Americans from the south of the USA who went south of the USA to Brazil. This is the history of Americana. ¿Qué onda? Soy Sebastián y este podcast es Otomi. For all of my non-Spanish native speakers, this is Sebastian and I'm a high school student in the Bay Area. I've got the facts and the opinions. Join me as we discuss topics of society, culture, identity, education, and life. So, Americana, what is it? Again, it's a municipality in the metropolitan region of Campinas in the state of São Paulo. What makes the city unique is its history. As the name likely reveals, it was settled by Americans from the United States of America. These Americans were former Confederates who fled the Confederate South of the United States to Brazil after the Civil War. The first settlers arrived in 1866. In total, around 10,000 Confederates fled the South. Now, in Brazil, these settlers were called the Confederados, which is Portuguese for Confederates, a reminder of their origins. The Confederados were accepted with open arms to Brazil as the ruler at the time. Emperor Dom Pedro II of Brazil hoped to improve the agricultural development of Brazil. So the Brazilian government paid for the relocation costs of any Americans who were willing to make the voyage from the United States. Dom Pedro had supported the South during the Civil War. And you may be asking now, okay, well then why would Americans want to go to Brazil? The Confederate soldiers, weren't they so proud of the South and they had the Southern heritage in the United States? Why all of a sudden would they want to go across all the way to another hemisphere to start a new way of life? It just doesn't seem reasonable why they would do that. But there was a reason why, and the reason was racist. While the United States officially abolished slavery in 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery in the United States, the Brazil didn't abolish slavery until 1888, being the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. Now, the Southerners found this movement to Brazil as a last chance effort to recover the lives that they had before in the Confederacy that was based in slave labor of people of African descent. Again, Brazil had slavery at the time, and the Americans also reported that the enslaved Afro-Brazilian people were less expensive to them than those in the United States. So it was appealing for these Southerners who wanted to continue their racist and bigoted style of life in the South, and that's why they made the effort to go there. Some Americans even brought their African American servants from the North down to Brazil, and the Americans that went there tried to grow crops that they grew in the North, and that didn't always succeed. The tropical climate of Brazil didn't allow for all of the same crops to grow and flourish. So many of the individuals who made the travel there they failed to establish that plantation-style life that they'd wanted and had to instead move to more urban areas. But still, there was a group of settlers, the original settlers of the Americana, who were the members of the former Confederacy, and they settled there. This included the Alabama ex-state senator William Hutchinson Norris. There, with this group of settlers, they planted cotton, which boomed successfully. There, a community flourished, developing into a small town known as Vila dos Americanos, due to the main families being American who lived in that area. They were mostly American. And at the time, it was part of the city of Santa Bárbara do Oeste. It was called this until 1904. Americana became a district in 1924 and a municipality in 1953. In 1938, the mayor of the little village of the city changed the name from Vila Americana to Americana. The assimilation of the Confederados with the rest of Brazil wasn't exactly perfect. They were an anomaly. Many of the white Americans considered Brazilians who were white or considered white within Brazil's society to be of mixed race. So they saw that many individuals of mixed race were being considered white, and they didn't approve of that. Additionally, Americans, the Confederados, brought their religion as well, and they introduced the first Baptist church to the primarily Catholic Brazil. Now, many of these individuals who moved from the United States to Brazil were concerned with race relations in Brazil. After all, in Brazil, as we've mentioned in past episodes, there was this ideal of a racial democracy. Now, whether this racial democracy, this label is accurate, is highly debatable. But historically, Brazilian sociologist Gilberto Freire coined the term after he visited the American South during the Jim Crow era and witnessed a man being lynched, which is a complete atrocity. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. And he said that he appreciated that individuals of different racial groups could mix freely in his home country of Brazil. He argued that this was evidence that racism didn't exist in Brazil. Of course, this is false. Again, so the accuracy of this label is highly debatable and contentious. However, it remains that in Brazil, there were still improved race relations and more mixing between racial groups than in the United States, which was very highly segregated. The Confederados had a very close-knit community, and members of this community tended to marry and have families amongst themselves. But children and members of this lineage who were born in Brazil were more likely to assimilate with Brazilian culture and leave for cities. Again, the individuals who came to Brazil were very racist, and they opposed abolition. In 1888, with the emancipation of enslaved peoples in Brazil, a mob led by a Confederado from Americana, he led a mob that lynched a police chief of Americana who was in favor of abolition. Sadly, slavery took a very long time to end in Brazil, even though enslaved peoples were emancipated in 1888. In fact, Brazilian President Fernando Cardoso said, in 1888, Princess Isabel signed the famous Golden Law, which should have ended slave labor in this country. I say should because unfortunately it hasn't stopped. From here, he released a task force that punished industries that continued to use slave labor. They successfully freed around 47,000 workers. Interestingly enough, when slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888, there was a small movement of immigration of the Confederados from Brazil back to the American South, where Jim Crow laws were still in place. Clearly, again, these were racist people who wanted to be in a society where there was a strong hierarchy of racial categories, and they always wanted to be on top. Again, we will get into this later, but this is really what causes a lot of the controversy regarding Southern pride and heritage and pride in the Confederacy, because there were primarily very racist motives, and that is extremely concerning, and they shouldn't be praised at all. Many of the Confederados were confused and shocked when they saw the interracial relationships that existed in Brazil, and they didn't approve of them. Think about it. Interracial marriage in the United States was not legalized until 1967. Now, in Americana, there were also Italian immigrants who arrived in starting around 1887. They began to arrive just as slavery was about to be abolished. These Italian immigrants received incentives to move and immigrate to Brazil. As the emancipation was just coming out, white Brazilians feared a Brazil that would be a quote-unquote black nation like Haiti. Italian immigrants didn't have special privileges like many of the other Portuguese descendant settlers and individuals who had established themselves within Brazil for many generations. But many of them worked as indentured servants. However, they were utilized by the government, almost like a biopolitical control of reducing the quote-unquote blackness of the country of Brazil, which to the white people who lived there, not all, but many, saw it as a threat to the country. And this was coming as slavery was abolished. Because remember, Brazil had over 4 million enslaved African people that were brought in and forced to work. Think about it. In Mexico, they had 250,000 enslaved people of African descent. In the USA, it was 388,000. In Brazil, it was over 4 million. That is wild. And Brazil had the largest population of enslaved African people. And that was just, and that's why there is a large Afro-descendant population in Brazil. However, historically, this did motivate the racist government to promote immigration from countries in Europe, such as Germany, Italy, and to some extent, I know this isn't Europe, but the United States, as we saw with the Confederados. So we'll talk now about the modern day Americana. So when referring to the Confederados of modern day Americana, that's usually referring to the descendants of the original American Confederate immigrants. These individuals who are the Confederados, who are descendant of these immigrants, are proud of their Confederate heritage and often wear Confederate flags at celebrations, place Confederate flags on grave sites, and wear the gray Confederate rebel soldier uniforms, as well as Southern dresses for the women. And while the original generations and inhabitants of the city of Americana were They spoke English with a American Southern accent. Brazilian culture and language, the Brazilian Portuguese language eventually took over. So most of the references to American culture are exclusive to popular culture, Western films, country music. Now, for the last 25 years, there have been annual celebrations called A Festa da Fraternidade Descendência Americana, which is basically the celebration of the brotherhood of American descent. Now, sources that I've read have been a little bit wishy-washy on where the celebration really does take place. Many articles say it takes place in Americana, and many other articles say it takes place in the city directly adjacent to it called Santa Bárbara do Oeste. As I've mentioned before, Americana used to be part of that city before it branched off into its own independent municipality. So for that reason, we're just going to assume that it happens in Santa Bárbara do Oeste or Americana. It really doesn't matter because both cities have very similar histories, and the Confederados have had a significant impact on the establishment of both cities. During this festa or celebration, they eat American food and play country music and sing Confederate battle hymns. Again, they use the Confederate flag just extensively for merchandise, like literal flags or quilts, aprons, clothing. They even use fake Confederate dollar bills to purchase them. This kind of reminds me of Sutter's Fort in Sacramento that I went to when I was in the 4th grade, and we would use a special type of currency. I forgot what it was specifically called. I don't think it was like Sutter bucks or something like that. But we would use them to purchase little items and candy and things like that. But it was nothing like this. Definitely not some Confederate descendant, some party, like some festival celebration like this that celebrates a racist past. And there's even a monument in Americana that honors the names of the first settlers of Americana. Let's be honest. This fascination with the Confederacy is very strange to us. It is to me. I've never understood it. Obviously, as my background is just, I'm not really connected to it at all. Both of my parents are immigrants. But the history of the Confederacy is racist, whether people like it or not. That's just the truth. The Confederacy stood upon the work of enslaved Africans, and it fought. The reason that this country went into a civil war was because the South wanted to maintain its population of enslaved peoples. So now, as I said, it's very strange to see this fascination for me of the Confederacy within in Americana, within Brazil. It's crazy to me, but there are people just like this here in the United States. I know it for certain. I was finding a video on YouTube about Americana and about some of the celebrations they have there. And at the bottom, one of the comments was an individual who said, "A proud Tennessean, proud of my Southern heritage. Brazil is now my new favorite place." I was like, the reason you like this place is really because of their celebration of the Confederacy? Okay, well, it's important that we address that these Brazilians of American descent and current here in the United States, American descendants of Southern Confederate heritage who live here in the U.S., they both have something in common, and it's that they tend to see the Confederacy as an essential aspect of their heritage. It's part of who they feel like they are. I do not agree because the history, it just takes reading a history book to understand that this flag and the Confederacy in general, if you dress up in that rebel uniform and you hold firmly to the ideals of the Confederacy, that is racist. They fought for a racist institution. They fought and they rebelled against the United States. What I find shocking is the people who believe they are the most patriotic individuals in this country will fly. They will fly the American flag and the Confederate flag right next to each other, even though they were on opposing sides of a war at one time. One of them was trying to reorganize the Union, with Abraham Lincoln trying to join the Union together. And then you have the South, led by Jefferson Davis, which was trying to take back what it believed was its God-given right of owning enslaved African Americans, which was so immoral, unethical, and wrong. And the only reason that they thought it was right was because of this idea of a white man's burden that somehow gave them the ability to own other people for their own benefit, because really all that happened was it was their economic benefit, and they utilized Christianity. The Confederates utilized Christianity to justify one of the most horrific acts of one group of people to another group of people that has ever occurred in history. Something that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that many of the modern-day Confederados are of mixed race. They have some African descent. So you will see people celebrating this Festa da Fraternidade de Descendência Americana. They will be of some African descent, mixed race, and you will see them dressed in the gray Confederate uniforms. And there's irony in that, because their ancestors who came here, who they're celebrating their Confederate ancestry. It seems like many of them are not aware of the fact that their ancestors were extremely racist and would be completely opposed to their very existence as individuals of mixed race. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think the city of Americana and the Confederados who celebrate their heritage, not all of them see it as something that's racist. And I do believe that the individual celebrating it there may be less intact with the knowledge of the racist past than individuals who live here in the United States, because it's likely that they aren't educated on the racist past of the Confederacy, and they might see it more as just like their heritage, like an individual who lives here in the United States and says, well, I'm proud to be of British descent, but in the end, their ancestors were landlords who terribly treated individuals of Irish descent. But again, I think that people should be informed about the Confederacy, what it stood for, and the fact that it is racist. It is racist. But yeah, nonetheless, it's important to talk about these things. It's very important to understand that they exist. And I hope you learned something new today, learning about Americana and the presence of American settlers in Brazil, which a lot of people always perceive immigration of Latin Americans to the United States and creating these hybrid communities of, say, Chicanx or Chicano communities that occur here in the United States. But now you see that in other Latin American countries, even in Mexico, there are communities of Mormons who live there. But yes, there are immigrant populations of Americans who exist in Latin America. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.